But Jason, almost no IPF champions use the conjugate method. And my answer to that is, so what? So what? Not necessarily relevant. And what you people need to keep in mind when you bring that up is that the IPF has a very elitist attitude. There's a lot of dogma among its members and the people who compete in it, and they have their own viewpoint on things. And there's a couple of points that I want to make with that. Because what I've always said is that I think conjugate is the best all-around way to train. Not necessarily that it's the only way to get the best powerlifting total. Okay, there's a difference between those two statements. Meaning there are other methods that will work just as well for getting a max squat, bench, and deadlift, right? And a lot of the IPF guys do a lot of high specificity training, which I tend to be somewhat opposed to due to the injuries, due to the staleness and everything else that occurs. And I think a point that needs to be made with that, and you do need to note the injury rate is actually a lot higher than it should be among a lot of these top IPF guys. All right, number one, some aspects of the conjugate method are there to reduce injury risk, dramatically reduce injury risk. Now that is largely, to some extent, due to the fact that clean sports are very, 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 very rare. And that includes the IPF. The IPF kind of has this whole idea, puts on a dog and pony show of how natural they are. They're not. And as many lifters out there say, drug tested does not mean the same as drug free. Now, when drugs come into the equation, injury risks go up. And so a lot of what conjugate was built around too was the fact that, well, anabolics can increase injury risk. So training in a way that allows you to train really, really heavy and maximally with the lowest injury rate starts to become important very, very quickly in that world. A lot of the IPF guys, particularly the lighter weight guys, are the ones who you see just avoid this type of training. Well, something to think about. If guys are lighter weight, the odds of them being clean or on much, much, much lower amounts of substances goes up, right? Essentially, what anabolics do for people in strength sports is they allow them to grow outside of their weight class. Okay, a short guy will do amazing in powerlifting drug-free because he can find a weight class that he'll dominate. He'll find a weight class that he'll dominate. What a lot of these substances allow you to do is what? Gain muscle. They allow you to put more muscle on your frame than your frame will be able to hold, which means you can go into a higher weight class. And if you're an inch shorter than everyone you compete against, at the same body weight, you have an enormous advantage. Well, being able to put more muscle on your frame allows you to have more muscle per inch of height. So do you see where I'm going with this? A lot of those guys are more likely to be cleaner on the spectrum. That doesn't mean fully clean. Cleaner. Okay? Something else to think about with that. The IPF tends to frown upon anything associated with anabolic use. If some people in the U.S. are like, well, the USAPL isn't it's like that as extreme. Yeah, but you haven't been abroad. You haven't been in other countries. When I was in the UK, and yes, I am personal real-life friends with one of the officials in the IPF there. Okay, he's on my friends list on Facebook. In fact, he bought a bunch of my equipment when I moved. He bought it because he extra gym stuff. So, gave him a good deal. But the point is, I know these guys, I know how they think. And yes, in a lot of countries, the IPF has a no fraternizing rule. Meaning, hanging out with and being too close of friends and working out with people who are in untested competition, doesn't even mean admission of gear use, is actually potential suspension from competition. Competing in an untested meet is suspension from competition. So you can't even go compete at a meet because they consider that endorsing drug use. You see where I'm going with this? These are the sort of mentality you see among this federation. This is their mindset. Westside admits to anabolics. They're very open about the fact that the people at their gym are largely enhanced. They don't care. They're like, we care about winning. And we do whatever it takes to win. That includes the best training methods, the hardest training methods, and that includes putting whatever we have to into our bodies. Because they admit to that, the training style has been associated with anabolic use. Therefore, in the mindset of many IPF guys, they're going to be biased against even messing with it, because they don't want to be associated with a drug user's training style. Okay, do you understand that? There's politics involved. Their random drug testing is not as random as you think it is. It's very targeted. There are people who don't get tested. There are people who get tested continually. I know a guy who was tested excessively and passed every time, who wasn't on gear, and then he decided to leave the IPF and go to the untested feds and put like 100 pounds on his deadlift within a year. Should tell you something. Maybe he was just a genetic freak who was actually clean. Because then when he goes untested, 100 pounds on his deadlift. Bam. But he was targeted all the time, purely for making jokes about gear, like on social media. He would joke about being on even though he wasn't. He would just make jokes. And he'd get hit with random test after random test after random test. They're going to have a bias against even using the method. They don't want to be associated. Okay? They don't want to be associated. The other thing to think about, what happens when you run this system of training? You get jacked. Conjugate makes you jacked as, I'm going to not drop the F-bomb, makes you jacked as hell. Out of any strength training program, nothing gets you jacked faster than Conjugate as far as just putting on slabs of muscle. When you're competing in a weight class, particularly the guys who are very conservative in their use, who are trying to make tight weight, do you think they necessarily want to use the training system that's going to make them thick too quick? Maybe not. That might not be ideal for their weight classes. As you go to the bigger, heavier weight guys, Blaine Summers, arguably one of the greatest IPF lifters of our era, went and trained at Westside for a while. But he's in a big heavyweight class. Doesn't care about getting too big. These guys tend to use high specificity training with lower variation because they don't want to accidentally get too thick. They want to be just big enough to dominate their weight class, and they focus a little more on specificity of training. And that could be a downside. Could you get too big? Well, maybe. How tight of a weight class are you running? But then we factor in the lack of athleticism, and that's kind of the other factor too. A lot of the IPF guys are also elitists in that regard. If they don't care about being good at multiple things, they don't care about all this stuff. You know how I kind of talk about the fact that I make fun of bodybuilders who say I only care about body composition. I make fun of the stupidity of that. Like, you should care about more than that. You should care about your athleticism, your strength, your health, all these other factors. Okay, what you see with the mindset of some guys in that endeavor, and it's a whole lot of them, they don't care about other stuff. They just care about their squat, bench, and deadlift. I don't necessarily think that's ideal. Therefore, they can only care about their squat, bench, and deadlift and be great at squat, bench, and deadlift. They don't have to be athletic. And I've known IPF guys who do very, very well in person who train that way, and they don't care about that. They don't do any conditioning work. Why? You know, high specificity training. No concern for these things. But these things don't remove your ability to have a good total. So guys who run Conjugate and Westside are all brutally strong at raw lifts too. Okay? The point is that this turned out to be a training system that is an amazing all-around system for athletes that just happens to also make you good at powerlifting. A lot of those guys are choosing to go the route of ultra-high specificity. Whereas I am promoting here, and a lot of the conjugate method promotes becoming an all-around thick and jacked and conditioned and explosive athlete who also happens to be good at the squat, bench, and deadlift. Tends to be where you specialize a little bit. But we want to be as thick and as powerful as possible and just be in good shape and be athletic. That's the idea. And a lot of them are not concerned with that. This system brings a lot to the table. It can make you a good athlete and a great strength athlete at the same time. It's why it carries over to so many sports so effectively, like American football and the NFL. That's why these methods are used in tons of other sports. So that's what's going on. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.